happening? Welcome in. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. Where I'm not going to say this every time, but if you see, I am somewhere a little bit different today. I'm actually down in Greenville, South Carolina, where my family lives. Pre-scheduled trip. It was like, if the Commanders are they're done, then I'll take a couple days off. Be nice, spend some time with the family. And Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels were like, bleep your plans, bro. We're going to keep playing football. So here we are, and I've told this story when I've been down here before, but it's fun being back in this building because I interned at the music station upstairs during high school and college. During high school and college. So it's very fun to be back in the building. It is hilarious that the Top 40 morning show that was here when I was a kid is still here. So that's fun little radio. Greenville is not a small town. It's smaller than D.C., obviously, but kind of a fun thing here from South Carolina. So I'll be here tomorrow as well. So if you're watching any of the video clips, you get a different background. Other than that, it's the same show. Except for we're extra loaded with guests. It's an extra fat edition, if you will, of the Hoffman Show, where today we will be joined by Dan Pizzuta, as usual, at 4:30. We'll also be joined by Marc Ross from NFL Network, someone who told us before the season that Jaden Daniels to DC was a quote-unquote slam dunk. So we'll see how he's feeling about that. I feel pretty good about it. We'll talk to Marc coming up at 5 o'clock, previewing the game this weekend. You'll hear from Logan later on in the show as well. But I actually, in getting down here today, had a flight delay, which allowed me to watch some extra film, which was fun. I'm just sitting in the lounge there at DCA, like, let's fire up some Lions defense. Let's fire up some Lions running game. Let's fire up some play action pass and kind of see how this team looks on film before Logan and I taped the Take Command film preview episode that is available now wherever you get your podcasts. And there was some interesting stuff that stood out. And one of the games that I chose to watch, because obviously at this point, they literally have 1,000 snaps. And the Lions snap distribution defensively is actually funny because they've been up in so many games that they actually faced the least running plays in the league this year. They only faced 359 runs. That was the fewest, 359. Flip the first two numbers, and that's how many the Carolina Panthers faced. I believe that's the exact number, 539 rushes. So being up in a football game, very helpful in terms of your total rushing yardage allowed, but obviously per carry, how do they actually do once you flip on the film? And one of the teams that I wanted to watch them against was the Indianapolis Colts, because they have a mobile quarterback. There's two, and I wish I had watched a little bit more Arizona tape, but I'll tell you why I didn't in a moment. But I wanted to watch a little bit of them against mobile quarterbacks because Jaden's legs are such a weapon, one that didn't really actually get going in major way last week against Tampa, albeit they did convert some big plays in key situations, including the final third down where Kalijah Kancey was left grasping nothing but a towel and then ultimately his own helmet in a Cobra surrender pose. But I wanted to watch against Indy to see how that much they used Anthony Richardson in quarterback option plays, and how much they used him as a designed quarterback runner, and then how did those things play off of each other? And what was interesting is so this is literally like the first 12 runs of the game for Indianapolis. The first play is this really beautiful design quarterback run. And it's like a GT counter basically, where I believe it's to the left. So the running back, Jonathan Taylor, who's obviously very big threat, big part of your game plan when you're facing Indianapolis, he lines up on the right side. And so he on the snap goes sprinting right, and some of the offensive linemen for the Colts look like they're going to, go some kind of outside run to the right, handoff pitch, whatever it is. And Anthony Richardson takes half a step that direction. The guard and the tackle from that side loop around and lead block for Richardson. This is not an option. This is a design quarterback run all the way. And you see the Lions linebackers fly to the running back. Like Jack Campbell, he's getting the hell out of there. Bang, I'm going to go get this running back. And so second-level defenders flow in the wrong way, get a couple of blocks up front, seal the edge. Next thing you know, Anthony Richardson's got a 10-yard game. That's good stuff. If I'm Cliff Kingsbury and I'm watching that, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go watch every other quarterback run that I can find against this team and see if that is kind of how they play. And then you keep watching this Colts game. Campbell does a really good job against an inside run of Taylor. They actually get a speed option, another design quarterback run to the outside. That actually does pretty well. So you got one running back run, goes nowhere. Two quarterback runs, chunk plays. Another inside run, nothing. They run a quarterback counter on a 3rd and 1 for 17 yards. Again, Jack Campbell flies off the running back. Quarterback sweep out of an empty formation. They get 8 yards in the red zone. Then they get back to the running back run games, and they have no gain, 2 yards, 2 yards, 4 yards, 3 yards, no gain. The Lions can be stout against the run. And they are super physical. They will hit you. I think another thing, not to get too deep into the weeds, but they play a variety of fronts, which is really interesting to see from a team that is very 4-3 personnel. But they will occasionally play an odd front. So it's something that looks like a 3-4 front, where they'll either bring a safety down to the box or they'll just be like in a 5-1 or a 5-2 situation. Where they have 5 guys across the front, 3 down linemen, 2 outside linebackers, and then 1 or 2 defenders behind them, depending on if they're in nickel or they're in base. And so that makes running the ball sometimes really difficult against them. And it's something that they actually combat on offense because the Commanders are like this as well, right? The Commanders sometimes will say, all right, we got 4 defensive linemen in the game and Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner. Sometimes we're going to line up with 4 across the front. Sometimes we'll line up with 4 across the front plus, and one of them is say, Dante Fowler, who can line up with his hand in the dirt, but he's actually going to stand up this play on the edge, and Frankie Louvu is on the other, and Wagner is in the middle. Sometimes Jeremy Chin comes down. He's there. Sometimes Noah Igbenogany plays a little bit farther inside as the nickel, and you kind of create what looks like you think of as a 3-4 base, but it's an odd front. It's 5 across the front. And the run plays you want to run against that stuff is different than what you might want to run against a 4-down front. You can imagine, because if you're like, hey, we want this double team to hit here. Hey, this guard is going to pull. This center is going to pull. Whatever. Where the defenders are matters a lot. And the Lions deal with that because they have this Sean Payton-inspired, very wordy offense where they'll go to the line with 3 plays called. And if the Commanders say line up this weekend in an even front, the first play was designed to beat an odd front, they'll kill the play, say let's go to the second run that we like better against this front, and you're never running into bad looks. The Commanders try to combat that by using some of their tempo and things and saying, hey, like, all right, you're playing 4 down. First down was kind of a waste, but now we know it's a call because we didn't give you a chance to sub, and now we're on the ball again. So there's different ways of going about it. All have their merits. But the point is, running on the Lions this weekend is something the Commanders are going to have to do. And Cliff talked about yesterday, we opened the show actually with this bite yesterday, how Dan Quinn has been a huge inspiration to Cliff Kingsbury. I'd say inspiration is actually probably the wrong word. A huge mentor. I'll use Cliff's word, mentor, to Cliff on like, hey, sometimes you just got to run it because our defense needs it. We need to kill the clock a little bit. We need to play complementary football. And by the way, as a defensive coach, you running the football has this effect on me as a defensive coach. I'm going to react this way, and then you can get to this other thing that you want to get to as an offensive coach. And so Cliff has learned some of the value of that kind of stuff. But the actual success this weekend is very hit or miss. Because the Lions, this is one game that I watched it for a specific reason, and the way to go about it was to run the quarterback. I do think that's going to be in play some this weekend. Buffalo did it another way. some of the other teams that have had some success, and especially lately, there are some teams that have had some success against the Lions. Their defensive stats in the final month of the season were not very good. Even though I think when you watch the tape, you're like, oh, no, it's still pretty good defense. But they had some struggles at times in terms of some yardage given up, some points given up, etc. And you're just going to have to find the ways that work for you, because the alternative is being like, all right, well, we're going to try to be really aggressive with the pass game, and then you risk the 3 and outs. You risk not controlling the clock, and that's when you risk their offense on the other side of things really taking the game script to a place that is not good for you if you're the Commanders. Do I think that being down early is a death knell for the Commanders? Absolutely not, because Jaden is capable of dropping back and keeping them in a game and not letting it get too far out of control. That's not how you want to play. It's not the best thing that's for your defense, unless it's not the best thing for the totality of the football team. And so finding a way, whether it's the stuff that I saw here, where if I'm Cliff and I'm watching that Indianapolis tape and I'm watching the success that Anthony Richardson's having and going, man, we got to forget some of the option. We got to go design quarterback run. We have to fully commit that sometimes Jaden Daniels is going to keep the football, and it's the playoffs, and he's going to have to take a couple of hits. But if they're 15 yards down the field and he's good enough at protecting himself, then we can live with that. Or it's in something they find somewhere else in the running back run game, because there is opportunity there in a way that's much greater than the front that you faced against Tampa. But no matter what, successful or not, you got to find ways to do it. The good news is they did it last week against Tampa and found that formula. And things worked out great. The bad news is the stakes are even high. You have to walk the same high wire. They've just placed it 20 feet higher because, man, that Detroit offense is nothing to sneeze at. We'll take a closer look at them next before Dan Pizzuta joins us coming up at 4:30 for his weekly visit from the 33rd team here on the Hoffman Show. the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980. We're always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. Laughing because just scrolling through Instagram in the break, and there's a post from the NFL that says, 4th down, Danalytics say go. That's right, everybody. We got Danalytics now. Dan Quinn, Dan Campbell. Showdown. Saturday night in Detroit. I've been saying all week, our coverage starts at 3. We've added more. Coverage starts at noon on Saturday, live and local here on the Team 980. It'll be a burgundy and gold game day. Goes all the way through the night with the live post-game show. And we're not just offering you what's live on the radio. I will be live on the internet, on YouTube, post-game with Kevin Sheehan, which reminds me, I need to text Kevin and make sure that he's still good for that. But now I've said it on the podcast, and I've said it here on the radio, so he doesn't really have an option at this point. And he committed last week. I have it in writing, so we just got to remind him that that's the case. Point is, me, Sheehan, post-game, live, Team 980 YouTube page right after the game goes final. You can also watch that at Craig Hoffman on YouTube as well. Let's talk a little bit more about this game amongst ourselves here and let you hear a little bit from Dan Quinn today. We are awaiting the official injury report. Should be out any moment now, as it is this feels like a Friday show, even though it's Thursday, because they're finishing up, they're traveling tomorrow, the game's in 2 days. So this is about the time typically on a Friday that we get the injury report. So I'll keep refreshing the interwebs and seeing if we get that. But what we know is that Bobby Wagner did not practice for the 3rd straight day and that he's going to play on Sunday. The good news is he's Bobby freaking Wagner. Like, that dude doesn't need to practice. If there's anybody in the Commanders organization who does not need to practice because he is going to be mentally prepared and is well-versed for having stacked thousands of reps to know exactly what he's supposed to do, it is Bobby Wagner. In some ways, my bigger fear is that not having Bobby during practice during the week to be out there and be like, hey, on Saturday, we need to be watching for this, that would bring down the level of everybody. But because he's in the meetings, because he's around, I'm sure he's out there at practice, and if he sees something, he can say it. He just can't do it from the middle linebacker spot. Well, then, that is that. But my fear is that it would bring down the level of everybody, but it is what it is. Having Bobby Wagner and the way that they had him this week and that they'll have him on Saturday is better than no Bobby Wagner at all. And the way he attacked the rehab is exactly what you'd expect from Bobby Wagner. He's going to be as good to go as he can possibly be on Saturday night. Now, Bobby has done a good job of making sure this defense is connected. And that is something that is very, 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 very important against the Detroit Lions. Joe Witt Jr. said it perfectly yesterday. They test your discipline. And with the combinations of runs, play action passes, deep shots, dominance in the short areas with guys like Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown, the precision that Jared Goff can start to get with if he heats up. Again, his hot streaks are as good as anyone in the league. So they test your discipline in a major way. Discipline, one of the ways that you have it is that you communicate. How often have we heard Joe Witt say this year, we got to make sure we communicate. It's communicated, it's sent, and it's received, and it's acknowledged. I mean, he always has like the system of like, it's got to be acknowledged. You can't just be like, I told him. It's like, well, did you know that he received it because he told you, like, I got it. We're on the same page. Confirmation. 10-4, copy. Like, you got to make sure that you are on top of all of that stuff against Detroit because they challenge you with motions. They challenge you with formations. They move St. Brown around. And by the way, once the ball is snapped, it happens fast. Penei Sewell, fastest lineman probably in the entire league. He'll be on you quick. You better know where your run fit's supposed to be. You better be in position to get there. And I watched some Jamison Williams tape this morning. I have never watched a player, and Tyreek Hill's obviously one of the fastest players in NFL history, and I'm not trying to say anything that Tyreek isn't as fast or Tyreek isn't fast. I just don't remember, or maybe it might just be I was so emotionally checked out on last season that when I watched Miami, I was just like, they don't have a shot, whatever, I don't care. And so it didn't hit me quite as hard, but I swear I have never watched tape like Jamison Williams' tape. in terms of the sheer way his speed jumps off the screen. Like it literally looks like he's playing at 1.25 speed. Like you just clicked up the video speed, except for somehow everyone else is playing at 1x. It's wild how quickly he gets into the teeth of a defense. And I guess I do remember some of that from watching Tyreek. It looked different because, you know, Williams is a little bit taller, a little bit lankier, where Tyreek is just like Sonic the Hedgehog on through, which is hilariously ironic considering the whole Sonic and Knuckles thing with the Detroit running backs. But with Williams, like if he's running a crossing route and he's got like a high cross, that dude is going to be 15 yards deep and halfway across the field like that. And your defense has to be on it. So the communication and the connection and being on the same page becomes super critical so you can pass things off so you don't have a coverage bust, because the consequences of big mistakes are going to be catastrophic because of the caliber of player that this team has, this team being the Lions, and because Ben Johnson is doing a lot of that stuff, putting you in conflict by design. And it should say more than Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson does a good job of calling it, and he's obviously the biggest driver of the offense as the OC. But, like, Dan Campbell's very involved, and this is the offense that Campbell brought with him from New Orleans under Sean Payton, and they put you in a serious conflict. And one of the guys who's going to be really responsible for communicating that stuff on the back end and has become a really big leader on that front is Jeremy Chinn. And actually today, Dan Quinn was asked about Chinn emerging as a leader, and this is what he had to say.
For that secondary.
Yes, and you're exactly right, Ben. He has developed into that space, and seeing others here, I think Bobby has been a good, I'm not going to say influence, but a connector for him, and really high standards of what it can look like and how to do. And so I just spoke to him walking off the field. I said, man, your communication this week has been so on point. And there's a confidence that comes with that. And other people feel that if you're on the field and you give good and correct information to the guys around you, man, you want to talk about like lifting others up. Like that's a really big deal. That's one of the best things you can do as a teammate. And so to see that type of communication where not only is he leading himself, but he's also giving the indicators and the things for others, that's when you can play really good defense.
And not only that, in terms of everything Dan said, yes, amen. Let's marinate it for a second. The other guy that's really good at that is Quan. So now you're getting that from both safety spots. And, not only did they miss Quan as a player week 18 when he was out sick, but like you could see the communication wasn't as sharp. And so as Marshawn Lattimore continues to reintegrate himself, and hopefully he's a much better version of himself this week without the rust that he had last week, and you have Quan back there, unlike Week 18 against Dallas with that illness. And Jeremy Chinn is taking his communication to the next level. Mike Sainristil still is getting more comfortable. BSJ, when he's out there, is doing a better job of that. Like, this secondary is going to have its hands full this weekend. But if they can at least be on the same page, they give themselves a real shot of being successful. Again, that doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. They're going to give up points on Saturday. It's the Detroit Lions offense. They average 33 a game. If you hold them to 26, did a hell of a job. And hopefully your offense does enough. But if you don't communicate, if you're not connected, and if Wagner's absence is felt from the week, nevertheless, God forbid, this ankle is worse than they're letting on. I mean, I guess he hasn't practiced, so do we take for Bobby Wagner's word for it that he's going to play? Yeah, I'm taking Bobby Wagner's word for it. But God forbid, if he's not out there, that is going to be a very, very, very big challenge on Saturday night. So we'll get the official injury report. My guess is that Wagner will be listed as questionable, but we'll see if we can have that info for you on the other side of the break. What we can guarantee for you on the other side of the break is a visit from our pal Dan Pizzuta. He joins us 4:30 every Thursday during the football season. We'll talk to him first about Commanders Lions, and then we'll get into the other games of the weekend with Dan as well. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Thursday before divisional round weekend, and oh yeah, Commanders still going strong. Crazy to think that it was just a year ago that they hired Adam Peters. A year ago today, he stepped off that plane, and then a couple days later, introduced as the general manager in Washington, eventually hired Dan Quinn, and here we are. And who better to preview a game between Dan Quinn and Dan Campbell than Dan Pizzuta? That's right, we got our own Dan. DP, what's going on, dude?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well as well. We love a Dan Bowl. We love a Dan Bowl. Let me just ask you straight up to start this. The number one key to this game, like the biggest deciding factor for you on Saturday night between the Commanders and Lions is what?
I think it's going to end up being what this Detroit defense looks like, and it's something that was a bit of a concern over the second half of the season after there were so many injuries, and then we kind of saw it completely turn around in that game against the Vikings, where they were able to play a lot of man coverage, they were able to blitz, and that really put Sam Darnold in a bad place, which we kind of saw again this past weekend. I'm very interested to see how Detroit is going to structure their defense. They are a defense that wants to play man coverage. They want to blitz. You do that against Jaden Daniels. He's been one of the better quarterbacks in the league against the blitz this season. We saw Tampa Bay last week. They tried to blitz him a whole bunch, and that just did not work. He tore the blitz up. So if Detroit is going to be in that type of defense, they're going to be aggressive. How Washington is able to handle that, if they can be good against the blitz and man coverage, make this game a shootout, that's how this game, I think, becomes really close.
So I'm glad you mentioned both the things, like the general and the specific thing you just mentioned, because literally my next question on my notes is Detroit's defense good? Which we could answer in a second, but I was peeling through all those the next gen stats earlier, and basically Daniels had the best rookie season by any quarterback against the blitz since at least 2016. He was number one since 2016, not just this year, in yardage, touchdowns, basically every passer rating, every statistical category, and his EPA total against the blitz was more than double any other rookie quarterback this year. But it's an identity piece for Detroit as well. So I guess part one, Dan, is Detroit's defense actually good? And two, if the fastball of blitzing might be a bad idea against Daniels, do they have a changeup?
So they are. I think they are good. It's structurally, I like a lot of the things that they do, because they are going to stay doing what they want to do. And I think you even see kind of, especially in their, the man coverage things, even though they don't have a lot of the cornerbacks that they were expected to have, their ability to communicate and pass things off, and there isn't a lot of open space or coverage busts when you see that, even though they don't have those top cornerbacks out there. So they are, I think, structurally sound. They have a lot of guys that have played there for a couple years, so that certainly helps them. They have been able to get pressure even when they don't blitz. So Darius Smith, I think, has been very underrated. It might have been the only good trade deadline acquisition that happened this year, but he has been incredible as a singular pass rusher for Detroit. So they have been able to combine some of those things, and we have seen them. They are capable of giving up some chunk plays, because sometimes that blitz pressure does not get home, and you have a quarterback who can beat that. But I'm not sure how much of a changeup they have, because they are so singularly focused on doing what they do. But to this point, it has been good. So I think they are going to kind of go down with the ship if that doesn't work. But on the other side, they do have an offense that is going to be able to score points on pretty much anyone. So they do kind of have a leeway a little bit there, where if they are giving up some points, they have an offense that's going to be able to make up for it too.
Dan Pizzuta, writer for the 33rd team, with us here on the Hoffman Show. You mentioned that they have all these backups in, and I feel like if everybody knows, or if anybody out there listening knows one thing about the Detroit defense, it's like those guys are really banged up. They've gotten Alex Anzalone back. They're hoping to have Terrion Arnold, who was hurt in Week 18, back for this game, and looks like they will. Who knows if he's 100%. But you mentioned structurally, like they haven't changed a lot. Have they had to change it all? Because I think one of the things that's interesting about Detroit is they have a level of continuity with their coordinators and their coaching staff and a lot of their players that you typically don't get in the NFL, because when you're this good, your guys get poached. And for whatever reason, Aaron Glenn doesn't have a head coaching job yet, although that might change within the next month. And we all know the story with Ben Johnson on the other side that we'll talk about in a second. So they should have this like incredible extended continuity, but when all the players leave middle of the season because they're all hurt, typically teams have to veer. Have they actually done that, or have they actually been so good teaching this defense that you week to week aren't seeing any structural differences despite all of the pieces that are missing?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much kind of what it has been. There hasn't been a lot of change-ups when you kind of look at their blitz rates. Just specifically, you go down game by game. The only game this year they've been under 20, the 2 games under 20%. One was week 1 against the Rams, and then when they played the Bears in week 13. Everything else, they have still been bringing it as much as they can. Over the past couple weeks, they've even really doubled down. Since week 14, they've had some of their highest blitz rates of the season. So not only have they not changed up, they've leaned even further into what they've been doing. And that is something that I think they just have kind of they're going to live with some of the high variance. And if we're not going to be able to create pressure with 4, we're not going to be able to hold up in man coverage on our own. Something is going to work. So if we can get that extra blitz, we can put that pressure. That's going to take some of the pressure off of our corners to be holding on for as long as maybe they would if we just rush 4 and the pass rush didn't come home. So they are just trying to play this high variance game, and they've leaned even further into it over the past couple of weeks. So that their change up right now is throwing harder.
I don't think that's how change-ups work in baseball, but hey, it's a football analogy. We can do whatever we want. Dan Pizzuta with us from the on the Hoffman Show from the 33rd team. So if I was Detroit, I'd also want to play a high variance game, because if I miss, if I give up a touchdown, then my offense just gets to go back on the field, and I'm perfectly fine with that. So if you're Washington and you're Cliff, and especially if you're Dan Quinn, and you're thinking about this game holistically, how much risk do you actually want to take? Knowing they're going to give you opportunities to take shots, do you just have to take them? Or do you try to kind of pull in the reins and play a game script that much more resembles what you did last week against Tampa?
Yeah, I think you probably lean a little bit toward the latter there, because just no matter, I think, what you do against Detroit, really, they're going to be able to do what they want to do. And they are just a team that is built so well offensively that it doesn't really matter what kind of game they are playing. They're going to be able to do it. If you're going to make them run, they're going to be able to do it behind that offensive line. Jahmyr Gibbs now taking a full reign of that offense as the top running back has been great. If you have going to make them drop back to pass, that is still something they are going to be able to do, even though everyone knows that Jared Goff is going to be throwing over the middle of the field into that intermediate area. There is apparently nothing anyone can do to stop them, because as soon as you put your linebackers back there to drop back into coverage, that's when they're going to run, and that hole is kind of a bit of a gap there in the middle of the field, and that offensive line is going to be pushing. So it's a kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of way to defend against Detroit, and that's kind of what they've taken advantage of all year. So I think if you are Washington, you do have that ability to kind of control the clock a little bit, have some of that run. You do have Jaden Daniels who's going to be able to control that on his own with his legs. And then I think you take some of those shot plays when the blitzes come and when those opportunities come, and that's probably going to be your best chance to win too.
So on the other side of the ball, that fantastic Detroit offense. First of all, as a guy who you watch a ton of offensive tape. You do your quarterback rankings, like the way that you write about football. I mean, obviously you're also watching what the defense is doing too, but like I feel like you're a guy who just has a great feel for different schemes and how things are kind of rolling around the league. How would you try to describe this Detroit offense and what makes it so special and what makes it so potent?
They can do everything, which really kind of makes it nearly impossible to defend. Kind of like I was saying, they have their one go-to. Jared Goff wants to throw that dig over the middle of the field, and like I said, it's so hard to defend it because if you're a defensive coordinator, you say, okay, we need to drop our linebackers back. Then you do that, and then you're giving up ground in the run game, and Detroit is they're probably the one team that is more willing to take that more than any other team in the league. So they have that where you're fighting in the middle of the field. Even when you have Amon-Ra St. Brown right now in that just middle of the field being that possession receiver, you have Sam Laporta who can do a similar thing as a tight end matching up either against a linebacker or a slot corner. I think the big thing that's really changed this year for Detroit, especially in the passing game, is Jameson Williams actually coming on as being a legitimate big play threat, not just as a deep threat. He's been taking some shorter passes, running after the catch, and he's gotten some of these schemed open things. So they just have so many ways to win. It's that they can kill you death by 1,000 cuts with, throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown for, 5 yards at a time. That's going to continually pick up a first down. But then they also have this incredibly explosive option with Jameson Williams who can just take off at any point at the field. And there's no singular way to beat this Detroit offense right now. It's just a well-oiled machine, really, at anything they're trying to do structurally, and it's been really fun to watch.
Yeah, and also they have answers for everything because it's this Sean Payton, really verbose. Like, they always have a couple of plays at the line of scrimmage. Whatever look you're in, they can get a play they like. It's just a gross offense because not only structurally is it so good, their players are so good. And then you have to figure out what you want to do on your side of it. And I think this is another interesting, like underrated, but very nerdy and important part of this game, Dan, is what does Washington do personnel-wise? Because Detroit plays heavier than almost any team in the league. They use that sixth offensive lineman and Dan Skipper a lot. They use fullbacks. They use two tight ends. And Washington plays at nickel at basically a higher rate, if not literally at a higher rate than anyone else in the league. Do you think that winds up having some kind of impact one way or another, the speed of Washington being an advantage or the lightness of Washington being a disadvantage on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the things too, where it's so hard to match up with them because no matter what you do, they're going to have a counter for it. I think I would still stay lighter if I'm Washington because I think that just kind of puts your best defenders on the field, and I think if you are just kind of going into trying to stop what they can do, I think you want as many good players on the field as you can. So if you're getting a little weaker by going into base defense, that probably takes that a little bit away. So I think you do have these defensive backs who are willing to come up and fit the run. And I think that has been something that has worked for Washington so far this season. So I think that's probably the game plan they go with, kind of sticking with what they've been instead of completely trying to change what they've been doing structurally. I think sitting in nickel, I think it is probably still the best way to defend it, even though Detroit is going to try to go heavy and try to really just kind of bully them out of it.
This is such a dumb procedural question, but I'm going to ask you because I think you'll know the answer. When Washington plays a three safety look a lot too, which might be a nice way to maybe split the difference there, like a big nickel. When all these tracking services do that, or like kind of capture that, are they counting that as nickel? So like when you say like Washington plays more nickel, is that truly three corners, two safeties, or are they counting that as five defensive backs and thus nickel?
Yes, when we're looking at a lot of the tracking services, that's going to be just based on the defensive backs on the field. So 4 defensive backs are going to be considered base, 5 will be nickel, 6 dime. So it's not necessarily telling you the exact structure of the defense, which is why I kind of like to go in and look at a lot of these things. But yeah, when you're looking at, someone's telling you how much nickel they played, it's just that 5 defensive backs are on the field. Doesn't necessarily split out between who the defensive backs are, especially because there's so many just versatile defensive backs in the league right now. So it would be very hard to kind of completely match what the defensive back structure is. So when you're looking at how many defensive backs on the field, that's what these, next gen stats and, PFF, that's what they're charting.
Okay, I figured you would, one, know, and B, have even more insight on it, but it is worth mentioning. And, Detroit's got one of those in Brian Branch. Like, what is he? Depends on the play. And also, right. It's worth mentioning that offenses operate that way as well. There's a lot of teams that are technically in 12 personnel, but that second tight end's acting as a fullback, so it lines up like 21. Or, most teams actually treat the Commanders' 12 personnel with Zach Ertz on the field as if it's 11, where there's just one tight end out there because they just treat Ertz as a wide receiver. So always fun chess match to watch. Okay, real quick, before we let go of Dan Pizzuta here, always appreciate his time on Thursdays during football season. Let's take a look at the other games, Dan. Texans and Chiefs. Kansas City's favored by 8 here, and a lot of people are like, I don't know, Texans they showed us something last weekend. Do you have faith that they can put together two performances, that are quality here? Or do you think Kansas City comes out, their offense started to look even better towards the end of the year, and that the Chiefs are going to wind up in their 172nd straight AFC title game?
I kind of lean toward the latter. It was fun to see what Houston was able to do last week. And I think it really was a lot of what we've seen from Houston all season, where that defense has been incredible. Like, I think it's been underrated how good that defense was. Great pass rushers. Those corners have been fantastic, and they kind of all showed up. The problem is when you have go against a team like the Chiefs, you're not going to sack Patrick Mahomes. So the edge rushers, as good as they are not going to play as big of a part. And because this offense does not have, a number one receiver, and they're going to be kind of throwing all over the place. The number one receiver really is a tight end. That's going to take these two outside corners away from, being the strength. So I think we see that. And then offensively, C.J. Stroud was much better in the second half. He still wasn't great. And the first half was really a lot of what we've seen from Houston for most of the season. Inefficient runs on first and second down put C.J. Stroud in third and long, and he's going to try to force some passes. And he was throwing not just some bad passes, but some bad decisions in the first half. And then things kind of turned around a little bit. He used the middle of the field much better, which is, again, going to be something hard to do for Kansas City. So I'm always going to really lean Chiefs, to be honest. Whenever there is a playoff game, I'm not going to be stupid enough to pick against them because they've made a lot of people look dumb that way. But I think they do, as we just saw a couple of weeks ago, I think they match up with Houston, and I think their strengths are better, and I think they take away what Houston's strengths are too. And I don't really think this is going to be a close matchup.
I totally agree with that. Obviously, Commanders and Lions on Saturday night. Typically I don't ask you for game picks, but heck, there's only 4 games this weekend, and this is the one that most people that listening are caring about. Do you give the Commanders a chance to win this, or do you think ultimately the Lions are just way too much, and you're picking Detroit, and whether it's to cover the 9.5 or something close to that?
Yeah, I think they can cover it, and I think it really kind of depends on what this Detroit defense looks like for like the first 2 drives. If Detroit's defense is locked in and they look like they did against Minnesota in that regular season finale, I think it's going to be really tough. But if it looks like it was, over the couple of weeks beforehand where they were, playing in shootouts, I think if this does turn into a shootout, Washington's going to be able to keep it closer than I think a lot of other people might be giving them credit for it.
So for the Sunday games, starting with Eagles and Rams, I find the Rams the most difficult team to predict in the league because they can be the best team in football and then totally incompetent on back-to-back weeks. Do you have, as someone who's probably watched a lot more of them, is there any way to predict what the Los Angeles Rams will be on any given weekend? And such, what do you think they will be this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles?
So to answer the first question, absolutely not. There is no way to figure out what the Rams are going to be. At the Rams' peak, they can hang with anybody. The problem is that peak does not show up in every game. You have a game like they had against the Bills where they just looked absolutely unstoppable. And then they didn't score 20 points for the next 3 weeks. And so it's very frustrating to watch. And, I think there was during that first drive, I think I tweeted out, "Oh, this is going to be one of those Matthew Stafford games." And then he had that he got hit, the fumble that turned into the incompletion by Rule. And after that, I was like, "Oh, this is going to be one of those Matthew Stafford games." It's the same question, different inflection, and they both kind of summarize what the Rams are going to be. At their height, they're very good. I'm very interested to see if this Rams defense can keep it up, because the Eagles offense was not very good last week. But I think we've seen with the Eagles so many times, you let them hang around just long enough, there's going to be someone with enough talent to break through. And we saw that with Zach Ertz last week. It's been Saquon so many other times this season. But if this Rams defense can do what they did last week, and they were doing a lot of fun stuff. They were winning one-on-ones with a four-man rush. They were using some sim pressures. They were blitzing at perfectly timed the intervals that really made it difficult for Minnesota to do whatever they wanted. And so if this defense can hang on and have a performance somewhat similar to what they did last week, I think this can be a pretty close game too.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are enigmatic as well. It's just eventually, like you said, their talent, they're typically enigmatic for three quarters, and their just talent is overwhelming. Speaking of overwhelming talents, the MVP matchup on Sunday night, how do you think this one goes down? Obviously, Baltimore beat the ever-living, out of Buffalo earlier this year. Can this Buffalo team that's much better now than they were then hang with Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, this is a game where I just want to sit back and watch, because it should be really fun. And it really is a shame that one of these teams has to lose, because especially the way these two quarterbacks have been playing, neither one of them deserves to have an off season after a divisional round loss. It is just, it's so unfair, to be in the AFC right now compared to what, some of the teams in the NFC have to go through. I'm going to be real interested to see how these teams personnel-wise decide to match up with each other. We know Buffalo has been using the 6 offensive linemen a whole lot, and I think Baltimore has the ability to, play against that kind of no matter what structure. Kyle Hamilton is one of those guys who we have seen is that defensive back who can move around, can play like a linebacker, can be a slot corner. Their defense has been great since he moved to a full-time, deep safety, but I think in a game like this, they'll move him around a little more. What's interesting is last week, Baltimore used a 6 offensive lineman as much as Buffalo did last week too. So they went super heavy, and just when you have that read option, that's all they were doing. It was like back in 2012, there was nothing really crazy about it. But when you have to pick between defending Lamar and Derrick Henry, there's no right answer. So when they have that, and then that opens up so many things in the pass game, I think this is really going to be a chess match. I'm so interested to see how these teams match up, especially if Baltimore does go heavy. We talk about teams that go in nickel. Buffalo is the heaviest nickel team in the league. They do it on 97% of their snaps. So if they're going to be light and Baltimore is just running out with either 2 tight ends, they do the 2 running backs with Patrick Ricard. They do sometimes with Ricard and 2 tight ends. They have that 6 offensive linemen. I think that's going to be very interesting how these teams decide to match up with each other. And I think we just have 2 quarterbacks playing at the highest level they've ever played at right now. So this is definitely going to be, the game of the weekend.
Can't wait for it. Wish we had more time to talk about it, but alas, spent a lot of time talking about what should be a good one Saturday night too, between the Commanders and the Lions. Dan Pizzuta joining us all season long on Thursdays. Hope that we'll be talking about another Commanders game, previewing the NFC Championship game next week. We'll see whether Washington's there or not, but Dan will be here, and we're looking forward to it. DP, always appreciate you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.
That's Dan Pizzuta. Read his work, 33rdteam.com. When we get back, former general manager, or should say former executive in the league, Marc Ross joins us, analyst for NFL Network. He said before the draft, Jaden Daniels to DC, slam dunk. Write it down, set it in stone. Why was he so sure, and is this even better than he thought it would be? We talk to Marc next.
right, you're hot.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube as well at the Team 980. Time now for Not My Beat, and today we're going to get right to it. We're going to bring in Marc Ross, who covers the NFL for the NFL Network, longtime NFL executive as well. It's our pleasure to welcome him back to the show. Marc, what's going on, man?
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well. And Marc, last time we talked was before the NFL draft, and I went back and checked just to make sure I had this. You said Jaden Daniels. Oh, this is not an uh-oh for you, sir. This is a heck yeah for you. Because you go,
Yes.
Jaden Daniels to D.C. is a no-brainer. And at that time, everyone's like, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. And Drake had a great season up in New England, I think, showing a ton of promise. But you were very confident that Jaden Daniels was the right guy. And I do believe that's worked out as a good take for you, my friend. Why were you so confident, if you take us back to then, that Jaden Daniels was the right pick for Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and company? And has this, with all that confidence back then, has this even been better than you thought it would be?
Well, for sure. Number one, I just believed in the talent with Jaden just when you watched him at LSU, just what you're seeing now. I mean, the guy had poise, he had confidence, he was a playmaker, he could throw it, he could run. He was always a constant threat. Loved the maturity, loved how he had played so many games. So he had the background, loved the off the field, the character, and basically in Washington with new ownership, new head coach, new GM, things were just kind of falling into place for him to have a stable environment to grow. And I thought he would play well. I didn't think they would take this step so fast and be a legitimate threat so fast. But, man, the future is really bright for the Commanders with Jaden Daniels.
What's the thing that he's doing better than you thought he would? Because I certainly have some things where I'm like, oh, wow, like this is crazy for a rookie to be able to do this. But we knew he was capable of so many things. What's the thing that's happening at a higher level quickly that has allowed this success in your eye?
Yeah, nothing he's actually doing. It's just that it happened so fast, that he was just able to do it so fast. And there really wasn't an easing in period, really from game one. You're like, yeah, this looks like the guy I scouted. This looks like this legitimate playmaker. Right. And then, of course, he just kept getting better. And, he never leveled off or had those ebbs and flows or stops and starts where, like, he looks bad. He just kept getting better. And now you're talking about him as, I don't know, top 5, top 10 type talent. Those guys in the AFC, of course, the Mount Rushmore, the big four over there. But certainly in the NFC, you're looking at, is this guy already, the best quarterback in the NFC?
That's what I was literally about to ask you that. Is there anybody that you would take over Jaden Daniels? I'm not even talking about like a futures bet, if you will. Is there anybody that in an NFC playoff game this weekend that you'd rather have at quarterback than Jaden Daniels?
No. It just, of course, Jared Goff and what Detroit has going on there, that's just a whole different thing of how they do it. But,
sure,
that's the system. That's all those playmakers. But just quarterback for quarterback, I'm taking him over Goff. I'm taking him over Jalen Hurts. And then Stafford, of course, is Stafford. And he's done it. He's won it, produced at a high level for a long time. But if I'm just talking about a dual threat, a big-time playmaker who can operate outside of the structure of an offense and say, go win us a game, that he's the guy.
Marc Ross, NFL Network, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Longtime NFL executive before he got into the TV role now. So if I put you back in your executive role or just kind of lean on that experience, is there a facet of Washington and or Detroit's success? Because I think a lot of it, when we talk about teams that have built a culture and an identity, I don't know how much stronger there is, especially amongst the new guard in the NFL. It's one thing if you're Baltimore, you're Pittsburgh, you've been around, and you've had the same coach for 15 plus years. But I feel like there's so many similarities between these two organizations right now. Is there an underrated facet of their success to you?
Well, stability. I mean, Detroit and both organizations really forever has just been constant change. And number one at the quarterback position in Washington, that's the least stable position that it's been. So, okay, here you have all these new pieces, as I mentioned, owner, GM, head coach, quarterback, that everybody's was on the same page. And same thing really with Detroit, where Dan Campbell came in there and Brad Holmes and the new owner came in, like everybody was, okay, let's start fresh. Let's start new. Doesn't matter what happened in the past. We're a whole new a group. This is the way we're going to build it. And we're all on the same page. And those results followed, I think. Now it also helps to get a generational quarterback like the Commanders did. And then for Detroit, it helps that they just kept crushing it. They've been crushing it in the draft year after year after year with, just stacking Pro Bowl players at just about every position group.
The draft element of this, I think, is so poignant. As you mentioned, that you just look up and down Detroit's roster and you're like, draft a guy, draft a guy, draft a guy. Obviously, Washington, that's how they hope to build it. They've gotten so far ahead this year with some of the kind of key pieces, even if theirs aren't going to be their stars moving forward in free agency. But I think for me, Mark, as someone who has covered a lot of bad football doing radio in Washington for the last decade, like this draft that Washington had and watching what Detroit has done from afar really solidified just how important the human part of it and the competitor part of it is in the draft process. Was that something, as you've been out of the league now, but you were a part of 2 Super Bowl winning teams in New York. Is there a moment in your career that was really clarifying for you on that human side, or a part of evaluation that maybe isn't talked about enough in the public, in the media sphere, that is so critical to building a championship team?
Yeah, so you always want, of course, the best blend of the talent and the character, and I think hard work gets kind of thrown out way too much with football players because they all work hard to a certain degree. What we really look for is competitors, and those are the ones that you want, where it doesn't matter where you're drafted, where you're from, the position, your background, who's really, when you're in the mix and stuff is hard, is going to compete for you and come through and say, yep, I'm going to make a play. And that has to be your star players who are competitors, and those role players too. We won 2 Super Bowls off of, role players just being supreme competitors. And when I get my moment, when I get my chance, I'm going to deliver. So that's really, when you look at Detroit's roster, if we're talking about them, and man, you go down, I'm on Ross St. Brown. He's a competitor. Jahmyr Gibbs is a competitor. Jared Goff, he's proven to be a supreme competitor at all levels. Their head coach. So, you just really have to build that winning mindset of, we're going to compete every down, and whenever that moment is the winning game, we have players on our roster who are going to come through.
I think that's so good. And there's a great anecdote in The Athletic on a story on Dan Campbell in Detroit that I read this morning, of Campbell calling Amon-Ra St. Brown into his office after watching some tape, and he whiffed on like a nickel blitz or on a nickel on a run play, and Campbell just goes, "Would rookie Saint have done that?" And Amon-Ra just shakes his head and goes, "No." And that was all that had to be said because of the competitor that guy is. On the Washington side of it, I think one of those guys is De'Ami Brown, a guy that was 3rd-round draft pick, really poor first couple of years, has had his best season by far, and seems to have found something within him. When you think about De'Ami specifically, but also generally how players are used, and making sure that synergy is there between the front office and the coaching staff, how did that play out for you during your career, and what have you seen from the teams that do it really well, including what Washington has done this year, having players up and down the roster have career years?
Yeah, you mentioned De'Ami. That's a great example. Like last week, I'm watching, like, man, this guy, this is the same guy. That's something that the coaching staff has really unlocked in him. And I'm sure a little bit of the ultimate competitor there, Terry McLaurin, has rubbed off on him, and they go learn from that guy. But yeah, you always want the synergy of, and I talked about stability and people being on the same page of your scouting staff and your coaching staff really have to know, okay, we're going to find these players for you, and we know how to work with these players. It can't be the scouting staff forcing players onto the coaching staff that they don't want. They're not going to coach up, or the coaching staff not being willing to take the scouting staff's players and say, well, we don't want to deal with those guys. And you really have to, that's the communication aspect of it throughout the whole draft process, free agent process, all year long, of these are the players that can help us win. How do we match what we're doing on the scouting side with what we're doing on the coaching side? And you mentioned Baltimore. I think, just using them, they just have it to a T, where, okay, here's our type of guy, here's our type of player. Let's roll them in here, and we're going to be successful just because that scouting staff and the coaching staff have been together so long. There's been changes with Ozzie to Eric DeCosta, but really just that stability and those guys really thinking exactly the same of how they're going to build it and the type of players they need. That's really what you're trying to achieve.
I always laugh at the Parcells, groceries, let me buy the groceries if I'm making the meal. And it's like, I don't know if that's actually the best model, but you do need to at least be buying groceries for the meal the coach wants to make. And there are some front offices and coaching staffs around the league, I'm like, you are good at buying Mexican ingredients, and you're an Italian chef. So that's
right.
That's not going to work. Marc Ross with us, NFL Network analyst. You can watch him on The Insiders and so many more of NFL Network's great programming leading up to the game this weekend. And, of course, year-round. It's the beauty of NFL Network. Football, 24/7, 365. All right, much less philosophical, much more to the point Saturday, Mark. Biggest key to the game for you, Commanders-Lions, is simply put, what?
Commanders have to keep up. And that Detroit offense, they just put so much pressure on the team, on what you do. And even when they make mistakes, you just know, okay, all right, we went for it on 4th down. this drive, we didn't get it. You know what? Next drive, we could score from 60, or we just run it right down your throat, or we can hit JMO for a huge play. Oh, and we're going to go for it again. So it's just that 4 quarters of always, they're just so talented. Their system is so good. They got so many playmakers that it's just hard to keep up with them. And, one mistake and the game is over with. A couple of weeks ago against San Fran where they were keeping up, and then Brock Purdy threw that one interception, and it was an onslaught from there. The Minnesota game last week where Minnesota was hanging around a little bit, one mistake, boom, they scored 30. Just like that, where they're just so explosive and so talented that Washington really, Jaden's going to have to just play out of his mind, and the defense really is just going to have to just do all they can to just not give up explosive plays, kind of control the clock, and just hope for the best, really. But Jaden really has just to play out of his mind.
Yeah, the good news is they have the best quarterback in the game. The bad news is that's on paper all they got. But how much of a chance do you give Washington? Rubber meets the road. Who you got on Saturday night?
Yeah, I love the Cinderella story. You got some friends down in Washington who, I told them last week was the game for them to win. They did it. This was going to be a little bit tougher. I would just be, hard pressed to really see a path for, Washington going in there to win that one. Growing steps though. I think any Washington fan before the season say, we're going to win a playoff game and look like we look at this point. I think everybody would sign up for that. But this week, I just would have to go with the Lions just because I'm picking them to go to the Super Bowl, and so
that's how that math maths.
That. Yeah.
I totally get it, man. I think a lot of Washington fans, well, there's certainly going to be some that are like, no, we got this, and hey, I love that. That's what makes doing our jobs a lot of fun is the passion. But Detroit won 15 games. They're really good. There's no denying that fact. Mark, always great to talk to you, man. We should do this more often. Really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll talk to you throughout the offseason, which hopefully for Washington's sake is not coming as soon as Saturday.
No doubt. Anytime.
All right, appreciate that. That's Marc Ross with us, 2-time Super Bowl champ here on the Hoffman Show. Won those Super Bowls in the front office of the New York Giants, one of their top scouts who built those Super Bowl teams with Tom Coughlin just a little bit over a decade ago. When we get back here on the Hoffman Show, speaking of executives, it was a year ago today that Adam Peters walked off that plane of Josh Harris's and stepped into Ashburn for the first time. We reminisce, and you'll hear a little bit from Dan Quinn reminiscing as well. Next, before we hit Never Read the Comments at 5:30 here on the Team 980. Still to come here on the Hoffman Show. Never read the comments, just 9 minutes away. Our pick six at 6, top storylines of the day, injury updates, and you'll hear plenty from Dan Quinn. A lot of questions. I guess because it's Thursday. Typically, the Friday press conferences are pretty quiet, but since everything got bumped up, maybe there's more media there today. Also, it's the divisional round of the playoffs. I'm sure there's some national folks there asking questions as well. So plenty from Dan Quinn coming up at 6 o'clock, and you'll hear from Logan some high-level thoughts on the game from the big fella at 6:30. But it was just a year ago today that Adam Peters landed in D.C. to accept the general manager job as the head coach. As the general manager. It'd be weird if he accepted the GM job as the head coach. Accepted the GM job here in D.C. It's been a magical year since, and one of the first things he did was, of course, go and try to find a head coach. That was his first task. Who's going to be his partner in crime? The guy he landed on, Dan Quinn, backwards hat, the whole deal, comes in, and they have totally remade this organization, and they've remade it into a winner. And DQ was actually asked today about that process because, hey, it's been a year. It's, people this time of year are always thinking about looking back, reminiscing. They're writing stories about the process. Keim had a great one, by the way. Keim going to join us tomorrow. Tomorrow's show is loaded, by the way. Oh my God, I can't even remember all the people that are on it. Let me see if I can pull up this list real quick, just so y'all understand. We got Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic in Detroit. We got Mike Jones, national football writer for The Athletic. We got Keim, and we're also working on another big national guest who we've had recently who was good. And, plus we'll have more from Logan. Like, tomorrow's, well, I don't even have to really do much tomorrow. You got to show up and not ask terrible questions. If I do that, I'll put on one hell of a show for you guys on a Friday. But today, letting you hear a little bit more from DQ. And like it has been a year unlike we've seen in 30 plus here in DC. And it started with Dan and Adam coming together. And so DQ was asked today to reminisce a bit. And what does he remember about that job search? And when did he know, like, hey, this is where I want to be?
What I remember most worry, I guess, like I really wanted the job. So I was like, shit, I hope they call, I had a sense in visiting with them. I came to Georgetown and we had our interview there at a hotel there. And so leaving there, I just knew like these are the type of guys, that I want to work with. And over the last, 11 months, they've proven that and then some, to say that was my instincts at the time to say this is the type of environment that I'd want to be a part of and the people, that I'd like to work with. And so that's, I'd say the in-between time, yeah.
I love that from DQ. What do you remember about meeting with them and then waiting? That it sucked because I really wanted the job. And I think that is incredibly human. I think we've all had that. We've all interviewed for something, been like, wow, I really like that, or I want that position. I like those people. I really hope they like me. I hope that this works out the way that it felt in that meeting for me to walk out being like, man, I enjoyed that. We seem to have a good connection. Sometimes that might have been on a first date, but I think we've all experienced it in the business side, the professional world as well. Just wanting that call to come through to say like, yeah, we want you. And of course, Adam Peters, I think, and Dan Quinn immediately hit it off. And you even heard after that first round of interviews, at that point, ironically with the Detroit game this weekend, like Ben Johnson's name was obviously coming up because he was considered the number one candidate on the market. This was considered by, I think, a lot of people the number one job on the market because of the new ownership, because of Adam Peters, because of the number 2 draft pick, because of the cap space, because of the sleeping giant fan base that was waiting. And so people just connected those dots. And, Johnson was a guy that's kind of this, football savant. And it would seem that this is where he would have wanted to be if he and Adam Peters got along. But, for whatever reasons, Johnson didn't come. You heard him pretty immediately. Like Quinn was real high on their list. They really liked that dude. And ultimately, obviously, we know why. It's worked out. But that involved Quinn. We talk about Johnson not wanting to ultimately take a job and pulling his name out of consideration in multiple places last year. Quinn had to decide the same thing. Like, he had a pretty sweet gig in Dallas. He got to be the defensive coordinator. He was never going to get blamed for anything, even though, I mean, even last year, that playoff loss, okay, yeah, people were mad, but he got to coach Micah Parsons. And if he had waited on one more year, there was a really good chance that Dallas would have looked at him and been like, hey, you want to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? And we can talk about whether that's a prestigious job or not. I do think that Troy Aikman, when he said not so much, had a pretty good point. But it was a place he was comfortable. You knew you'd be coaching Micah. There's a lot of, you get to keep all your staff. Like, there's a lot of positives to just waiting it out. But he wanted more, and he was ready to jump back in. He was ready to take that leap. Why did Dan Quinn think that last year was the time to actually make that leap that has now landed him a year later in the divisional playoff round?
Which one?
Cut 13 if we could, Max.
Just the opportunity of the people, like I said, I think maybe way back, hey man, I like doing hard with good people. And these guys have proven to be great people. And that's what you're looking for when you're absolutely putting your life's work together with some other people. Like, you want to make sure, like, this is how we want to do it and to do it together. And so I feel that kind of support from Adam every day. And, every time Josh and I are together, we feel that. And so that's a big deal.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. And here we are 1 year later. Peter's got his head coach. That coach has a playoff win, by the way. Speaking of the Cowboys, where are they? Right. They're looking for a head coach. And where did Dan Quinn bonk out in the playoffs last year with Dallas? That's right. 1 week prior to the week that he's at right now. And he, for all we know, he's got more wins in him. Would love to see it Saturday night in Detroit. When we get back here on the Hoffman Show, Detroit fans are starting to pipe up a little bit in the comments. And you know the history of this show and fans of opposing teams jumping in our comments, it hasn't ended well for them. So never read the comments. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty good time next here on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, brought to you by the Maryland Vehicle Theft Prevention Council. Did you know a vehicle is stolen every 16 minutes in the state of Maryland? The key to preventing theft is in your hands. Lock your car, take your key, use an anti-theft device. Learn more about vehicle theft prevention at mdauthotheft.org. All right, it's 5:30. It's Thursday, and that means it is time for us to dive into the comments section on YouTube, where you can stream the show live every single day at the Team 980, or we chop it up on demand and we put up the pieces at the Team 980 for the usual use of YouTube if you're more of an on-demand type of person, or at Craig Hoffman, where you can subscribe. And we're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers in 2025, by the way, in case you missed that. We're at 10,000. We crossed over that just before the new year, and that's taken about 2 years. So why not go twice as fast in half the time? That's our goal. So go ahead and hit subscribe over there. Make sure you're getting the best of the show each and every day. Of course, if you're more of just an audio person, then you can just subscribe to the Hoffman Show podcast. We'd love for you to do that too. We'd love for you to do it all, but you don't need to watch the show 4 times. We think it's pretty good. That seems aggressive. All right, it's time. Never read the comments.
We tried to warn them. They didn't listen.
Yeah!
Every week, the Hoffman Show goes into the belly of the beast.
We read those comments, baby.
Never read the comments.
All right, let us dive in. And man, there are some doozies in the comments this week. I feel like our comment section has just gotten completely sideways, which can make for some fun radio. And, we got haters all over the place. We got people, I don't know. We're just going to see where this segment goes. By the way, Max, I'm in our Odyssey studios down in Greenville, South Carolina, because I'm visiting family and the Commanders won. So I was like, well, I'm not doing the show. We got our guy Max running the board back in D.C. because Anthony's at Flag Football Nationals. I did talk to Anthony earlier today. He was getting ready for a game. He needed to give me some contact info, but he sounded focused. He sounded ready to go. So I'm excited for Ant on that front. But Max, this is your maiden voyage and never read the comments. Are you ready? Max, your silence.
I'm trying. Of course I'm ready.
Okay. That's the first time I've had Max talk the entire show. So I did kind of spring that on him. So that's on me. So at Kyler Kill, which, okay, on the screen name, at Kyler Kill, we had laid out this week why Jaden Daniels was the best rookie quarterback arguably in the history of the NFL, certainly in modern NFL history. We had all kinds of stats. First time he's done this, first time quarterback has done that, best rookie season since this. And this Joker goes, okay, pump the brakes on Daniels being the greatest rookie QB. He's only okay. He's not lighting anything up. And I just want Commanders Universe to know I did respond to this. I probably shouldn't give trolls attention, but I did respond asking, because I feel like, maybe we can give him the benefit of the doubt. I did respond to this comment going, are you a troll or a dumbass? So we'll await response. Report back next Thursday on Never Read the Comments. But the majority of the comments right now at the top of my comment section when I refresh are on a YouTube short that we did or a YouTube short that we did that was just a simple game preview about the Commanders and Lions. And it seems to have gotten in a bunch of Detroit Lions fans' algorithms. And you got people like Douglas Bryant, 8744. Funny, you don't stand a chance. Zwenzel, Lions going to win easily. It won't be close. At least William Hatfield, 4969, is much more of open with his homerness and just being a fan. Detroit versus everybody. Let's get it. Run that insert word I can't say on the radio here. Joe Varskovich. Joe, I'm sure your name is easier to pronounce than I just made it, but when you mush it all together in a screen name, that one's on me. If Washington has a chance, they're going to have to score 40 points. To which I say, don't threaten me with a good time. DAJ Music, 6657, Lions roar by 17. I do think that the Lions fans are generally more respectful than the fans of, say, the Chicago Bears or the fans of the Atlanta Falcons that we have dealt with in this segment earlier on in the season. We have had a sordid history with opposing fan bases that have popped up in this here segment and in these here comments. And let's just say it hasn't really worked out super well for the opposing team. Also, to the YouTube stream, we're going to take a quick break because I think our radio signal went down, and we're going to have to fix that. So we'll be right back on the YouTube stream here on The Hoffman Show. All right, it's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Hopefully rolling all right now. Had some tech issues there, and, we're working, finding ways to make sure that we can get you all the preview you need of the Commanders and the Lions. And we maybe not working. All right, more tech issues. Be right back. All right, it's the Hoffman Show. A bit more adventurous today than we anticipated, but that's all right. Here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Sorry about the technical issues, but we're rolling again for hour number 3. And look, never read the comments is always a good time, but it was a weird slew of comments this week, and it was a bunch of Lions fans talking crap. And let's just say this. Never read the comments next week. If the Commanders win, we'll make up for it then. In the meantime, it's time for a Pick 6 at 6.
It's still loading.
All right, and we're just going to roll right into it with the top headlines of the day from Dan Quinn and from Bobby Wagner spoke today and said that, hey, there's not a whole lot going on there. But number one in our Pick 6 at 6 today was a Bobby Wagner update from Dan Quinn. Max, do we have that bite ready to go?
Getting it ready right now. The audition does not want to help me.
All right, Max is fighting an absolute war in our war room back in DC as I'm in operating remote today. So Max, if we get the sound bites to a point where we can play them, then we'll roll with that. But I do have the transcript, so I could do a Dan Quinn impression if we wanted to.
Ooh, hold on. So Bobby Wagner updates what you wanted, right?
Yeah.
All right, let me see if I can. There we go.
No. Okay. Yep. So he did a good job on the rehab part of it, the things, but getting a chance to see him, yesterday some through the rehab and in today's practice, he looked strong.
All right, so that saves me from having to try to do a Dan Quinn update because I'm not very good at Dan Quinn. It's an impression he does, I don't know, outside of cussing a lot, which I can't really do on the radio. It's a hard one to do. But the good news is that Bobby Wagner is good to go for Saturday. Wagner also talked with the media today and saw Sam Fortier's Instagram page. Pretty funny exchange because he's kind of pushed off his media avail all week. And They joked. They were like, hey, we gave you the good guy award for being the best with the media, and then you ducked us all week. And he's like, yeah, well, I just had to make sure I got it, and then I could show you who I really won. So it was fun and games, but he did say that, like, this ankle injury is not going to affect me. I'm playing. Like, it is what it is. And the Commanders need Bobby Wagner. He is still, against the run, one of the best linebackers in football. He made second team All-Pro in part because he's Bobby Wagner and people know him and he's playing on a winning team and we know what he's meant to this team as a leader and all that kind of stuff. But also because he's still one of the top tacklers in the NFL. And what he gives them against the run, the physicality, the being where he's supposed to be, getting everyone else where they're supposed to be, is enormous in this game. So making sure that this ankle injury that popped up late in the Tampa game isn't an issue moving forward is a big deal for Washington. Of course, the other big thing that everyone wants to ask DQ about is these winning time moments where the Commanders have been spectacular this year in terms of the ability to win games late. They're 8-4 in close games going into the playoffs, now 9-4. Meanwhile, of course, the what's it called? The Lions are 7-2 in close games, so they have been excellent as well on that front. But how has Dan Quinn, as we cut 3, Max, if we can, how does he integrate practicing those winning time moments into actual practices so that they're ready for them in the game?
That you've talked about?
We do some Wednesday, so we do 4 a week that will integrate things. So some's part of a walkthrough on a Wednesday. Usually Thursday we do some type of 2-minute against one another. Like last week we did second possession of an overtime. And then Fridays are usually reserved for like last types of plays. 12 seconds, no timeouts. Joe may do a 4-minute. Cliff may do end of the game. And then tomorrow some special teams related ones that goes in. So Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, and then Saturdays. It's a whole team, but more special teams, emphasis on that.
So there you go. They're ready for those moments. They're ready for those situations. And it's one thing to be ready. It's another thing to have to deploy that knowledge and those lessons, if you will, as frequently as the Commanders have this season. In Dan's career, have winning time moments ever presented themselves this much?
The season?
Not in this fashion where, so much of, the last game to go. So to have the work put in allows that to take place. But it's a confident group, but they have had to go through the hard things together to gain that confidence. Like, I wish all resilience would, come when it was sunny and nice, but that's just not how shit goes down. Like, it comes in the hard moments and the hard losses and
Dumped it.
lessons. And so we've heard us talk a lot on Tell the Truth Mondays. What's the lesson that we have to take and then apply it? And we have become stronger by having some of those hard lessons, Nikki. That's the honest truth to it. And so it gives us confidence knowing that we have been in the hard stuff. So it's like, okay, that we learned it's hard. It sucked, but this is how we got to improve.
Dan Quinn earlier today on those winning time moments. Commanders have had so many of them this year. Number 3 in our pick 6 at 6. We're going to go to cut 5 here, Max. Cut 5. One of the things that I've thought a lot about this week, and it's one of the things that we talked about a lot in our Take Command preview show, and one of the things that I'm going to ask our litany of guests tomorrow, from John Keim to Nick Bumgardner, who covers the Lions for The Athletic, to some other folks that we have lined up, is just how aggressive should Washington be? Because there's a part of me that says they should actually be ultra-conservative game plan-wise. Can you frustrate the Lions into mistakes? Can you milk the clock? Can you force them to get kind of antsy on defense and commit a bunch of penalties? Because they are a very heavily penalized unit, and it's backup players. Backup players commit more penalties because they're not as good, so they reach and they hold and they grab. Offensively, can you find a way to put a lid on everything? And even if you give up some chunks and it's painful and you're giving up long drives, can you make Jared Goff impatient to the point that he forces one to Jamison Williams down the field, but it's into double coverage and your guys are there and you can make a pick and you can steal a possession and then you can prevent points that way, even if it's on the back end of a long drive, but he tries to squeeze a tight window in the red zone and then you get the interception. Like, that's a way to win the football game. But because Detroit's so aggressive, there's an opportunity to be aggressive back and kind of use that against them and take some big, huge chunks on offense when they're playing that man-to-man, when they're blitzing up the wazoo like they do. So what is the risk-reward of an aggressive game plan for Dan Quinn this weekend?
I'd say the risks are doing things that you don't normally do on a consistent basis. So that would feel, what's the word? Like if you're trying things that you've never really done before, that would be a risk. Every game has, what do we have to do to win this game? And so not all of those are the same. So when you put all 3 of the units together and the coaches together, they also have a connection to say, this has to happen for us to play well. But we don't put one side, hey, you got to do this, and you're on your own. Like, it's always all connected.
And that's something that I think we see play out when they stick with the run game, for instance, when it's not working, because they don't want to leave their defense out to dry. It's something that Cliff Kingsbury talked about yesterday. But if we could actually pull cut 14, Max, here, on Dan's perspective on this, and we played this clip a couple times during the show yesterday, including during the Pick 6, how DQ has been a mentor and an influence. I mean, he's the head coach. He's also his boss on Cliff continually sticking with the run game, even when it's not working, because he knows it's the right thing for the team, because the offense is more than just about the offense. So DQ was asked kind of the follow-up to that today from his perspective.
Well, I think it speaks to Cliff and Joe and Larry, whatever we have to do to win the game. And that's the thing, that's the most important part of it. And so the fact that Cliff's, been in this chair, like, he can recognize that. And so all of those guys knowing their part into it is the most important part, is winning. And if that means, using some time and clock on certain spaces, then we'll do that, even when it's hard. But, like those 3 and the staff in general, like, they have brought a lot of insight and just the mindset to say, man, like, they're down for it, and whatever we have to do to win. That's a really cool feeling as a head coach, knowing like that there's not pushback or anybody, on their own agenda. It's just like, this is what we got to do to win.
Craig, did we lose you?
It is part of the brotherhood. It is part of the brotherhood that you're going to do what the team needs to do to win, and they have done a tremendous job of that this season. We'll hear more from Dan Quinn on the back end of our Pick 6 at 6 next. But first, let's get an update on the latest in the world of women's sports presented by Wawa. Chicken how you wanna at Wawa with customizable, crispy, or roasted chicken sandwiches.
Westwood One presents Today in Women.
It's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Coming up at 6:30, so just about 8 minutes from now. You hear from Logan Paulsen, some first thoughts on the game this weekend, high-level look at some of the similarities between the Detroit Lions and the Washington Commanders, how they've built their teams, Detroit over the last 3 years, Washington just in this single offseason, to collide on divisional playoff weekend. We continue now, though, with our Pick 6, top storylines of the day, best sound of the day from the Commanders. And what's interesting about Dan Quinn and Joe Witt specifically on their side of the ball is this Detroit team is not new to them. They saw what happened against this team last year when they were in Dallas. And obviously, they've brought the scheme with them. They haven't brought the players, but there's a lot of similarities to when you go, or I should say, not a lot of similarities. When you game plan against a team, what you try to do is see how they attack teams similar to yours, and that doesn't necessarily have to be within the season. Like, it's easy when you play a divisional game. It's like, let's go back and watch the tape the first time, but they're going to make adjustments. But if you're, a Sean McVay disciple, you're going to go, and they, the team you're facing has faced the Rams, or you're an offense facing a Vic Fangio disciple, and maybe you played the Eagles earlier, you're probably going to check out like, hey, let's scout how these teams treated some of our looks, some of our personnel packages, and try to ingratiate that into your scouting report. Well, the Cowboys last year with Dan Quinn and Joe Witt played these Detroit Lions. And so what does Dan actually take out of that game last year and implement into how he's preparing for this year's game?
We definitely wanted to watch it, and so you can take some things about play calling, featuring players, but it is different, year to year. They've had a fantastic year, just utilizing guys in different ways. The production, I think, is what just absolutely jumps out to you for different players. And so sometimes you may see one player just absolutely off the charts, but when it's spread, so much, that's a big difference. And that's what makes their offense, such a unique challenge.
It has evolved. And, I made this point a couple times this week, and I think it's a really important one to stress. Detroit, part of the reason they're so good is because you're not supposed to be able to do what they've done. And I know this hits differently in D.C. because of how the Ben Johnson head coaching storyline went down last year. But Ben Johnson should have been a head coach last year. And he may have supposed to have been a head coach based off his success 2 years ago. Like, that's kind of how it worked for McVay. Everyone was like, this guy's good. Like, let's interview him. And Sean took the opportunity and left instead of sticking around in the way that Ben Johnson has not just once, but twice in Detroit. And Aaron Glenn, for whatever reason, hasn't gotten the head coaching job yet. That very well could change within the next month. I think he's a huge player in New Orleans, if not a couple of other places. But you're not supposed to have this level of success and keep all your people. How many times did Belichick have to replace his assistants? What was funny about Belichick is he kept replacing them with the same people because they never worked out as head coaches, and they came back to New England, got hired again, got fired, came back to New England. And it looks like Josh McDaniels is in play to become the OC of the Patriots again, this time under Vrabel, which would just be downright hysterically funny. But you don't do this. How many times has Kyle had to replace his coaches? How many times has Sean had to find a new OC? And so because they have a level of continuity and they've been able to grow, and especially on the offensive side with Johnson staying, but also Goff in place, St. Brown, Jamison Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, their offensive line, their offense is different, and it's just a better, more evolved version of what it's been in the past. Number 5 today in our pick 6. The stat sheet obviously is pretty impressive for the Detroit Lions offensively. They lead the league in points. They're up there in yards. You go to the advanced stats, the EPA per plays, the success rate. There's so many things that show up that you can quantify statistically. So Dan Quinn was asked today, is there anything about these Lions that doesn't show up in the stat sheet?
They got a lot of stats. That's a good one to ask. I would say the play style. That doesn't show up on a stat sheet, but you can see it and feel it in terms of the physicality that they play with, the aggressive nature that they play with, not just, a fourth down attempt, although they're, highest, but just challenging people. They play a lot of man-to-man. They're aggressive. So That doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but you do see it when you watch them play, and we certainly have a lot of respect for that. All three phases, there's a real edge and a toughness about them. You're welcome.
The play style, it's funny because it doesn't show up on the stat sheet because you have to experience the sheer violence of it to really understand it. But at the same time, like the turnovers they generate and some of the ways in which they're able to pop in second halves of games, I think does show up on the stat sheet. If you look at like a box score and it's like, why are they so good late in games? Because they just keep wearing you down. And there's a bit of a Lions flu too. Like there seems to be a hangover effect from playing this team. I don't think it's as bad as it was the Niners a couple of years ago where literally no team played the Niners and won the next week. But it's pretty close to that where not only does Detroit beat you, a 15-2 football team, but they might beat you for multiple weeks, which is going to be interesting for the Commanders if they can pull this off. Like what's left in the tank? What's it going to take to beat this Lions team? Quite a lot. Which is why, as we head to our final soundbite of the day in our Pick 6 at 6, I thought this quote that closed Dan Quinn's press conference today was pretty appropriate to close out our Pick 6 at 6. This team has embraced the moment, no matter what the moment is. Why?
We do embrace it for sure. I think it's because of the volume of times we've been in it, John. I think that the experience into those spots, like I talked about earlier, the hard fights, doing it together, you do gain confidence from going through that. And they've been in a lot of close games, not just over the last month or so, but really the entire season with the exception of the first game. And you do grow together. And these guys have really bonded and connected, and they trust one another. And I think that's a big deal. If you have that kind of trust, John, then like the commitment grows and their connection grows. And so the trust of themselves, they trust one another. Like, that's a big deal. Not every team has that.
Sure don't. And I think the two teams that probably have it the most in the NFL are arguably these two teams. It's arguably Washington and Detroit. I think other teams that have that are Kansas City's had it for a long time, and it hasn't gotten stale there, which is pretty remarkable. Baltimore, same thing. Like the teams that are around this weekend are teams that believe, teams that have an identity, teams that just seemingly find a way. And we'll see which team can find a way on Saturday. Logan Paulsen and I talked about kind of that element of this game. To start off our Take Command preview, we'll give you that first part of Take Command next as we wrap up our final hour of the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and always live on the free Odyssey app. It's the Hoffman Show, Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Less than 60 seconds till we hit you with Take Command and a high-level preview. Logan and I just getting kind of the first thoughts off our chest about this upcoming game between the Lions and the Commanders. But a couple housekeeping things real quick. First, I would like to tell you that we are brought to you by the Maryland Vehicle Theft Prevention Council. Did you know a vehicle is stolen every 16 minutes in the state of Maryland? The key to preventing theft is in your hands. Lock your car, take your key, use an anti-theft device. Learn more about vehicle theft prevention at mdautotheft.org. Also want to let you know that we are loaded up tomorrow here on the Team 980. We will have John Keim on the show. We will have Mike Jones on the show. We'll have Nick Bumgardner, who covers the Lions for The Athletic, on the show. And there is a chance that we have a couple more guests as well, as if we needed any more. Right now, though, you will hear from one Logan Paulsen. Very tall man, very strong, very bearded. Very, very smart. And this morning we were able to chat about this Commanders and Lions game. And we started off by just kind of comparing these two franchises. Two teams that had been on hard times for a long time that are now finding themselves as two of the final 8 in the NFL's 2024-25 season.
It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. Logan Paulsen there. Craig Hoffman here, and it is time to preview the divisional round playoffs featuring your Washington Commanders and the Detroit Lions. Two teams that mirror each other in so many ways. It's going to be a lot of fun to break this one down, Logan. We had a great crossover episode with our Detroit podcast, but it's time to dive into what you saw on film. And I will acknowledge for those watching on YouTube, yes, I'm in a very different place. It's really a podcasting cliche today for me, Logan. I'm podcasting from my parents' house.
Yeah, but it looks good though. You got like some trophies and stuff over there in the background, which is nice.
I'm like,
what? On the other side,
where we got? We got some stuff that my dad won. We got some like toys from my childhood. That back there, that's the cover of the book that my dad wrote. The Reality of BS, big sales. That is there. Free shout out for Dad's book on the podcast. That's not what people came for. They came for football analysis, and that's what we are going to give you. All right, let's dive in, Logan. And to me, the first thing that sticks out about this game is the similarities between the two teams. And it's hilarious that their head coaches share a first name because their head coaches share quite a bit. There is just a mentality about the way both of these teams were built. There's a lot of crossover in terms of similarity. There's even some crossover in the front offices. Lance Newmark, Ben Sosna coming from Detroit to join Adam Peters' staff in D.C. The physicality and kind of how these teams play, there's just so much there. What sticks out to you in terms of the biggest of pictures here and how Detroit has gone from a sad sack franchise that is now a 15-win team and the number 1 seed to a Washington franchise that was a sad sack franchise, flipped ownership, got all these new people in, and is now a 12, counting the playoffs, 13-win team entering this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to think like 3 years back on the Detroit Lions, and what they've done from an offseason kind of team building perspective. And I think they've just like knocked it out of the park. And you see a lot of those kind of early footprints with Adam Peters coming here. You mentioned the similarities in personnel or like the crossover personnel, the people that have come from Detroit. And I think you see quite a bit of that, right? You kind of get this tough compete emphasis in the building, right? You draft guys that are tough, competitive. You draft guys that you have a very clear vision for. Like I think about the Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell draft for them and how that was much maligned, but they had a really strong vision for those players. And again, I think there's a lot of that going on. And to me, it's just like right now, them, San Francisco maybe are like the best franchises to me in terms of like how you build your team, right? You build it through the draft. You got to hit on people. You got to kind of have visions for personnel, and then kind of the accents that you put on it with free agency additions. Like I think about Zeitler coming in, he's their right guard, like what he's done for them, when their last guard departed in free agency, like all those little moves are really big. And then I do think so that's a personnel element, right? And then I think there's kind of this data-driven approach to how they play offense, right? Which is like hyper aggressive. We're going to go for it on 4th down. We're going to possess the football. And I think you see the power and impact of that because now all the top teams do that. Think about the Buffalo Bills, the Philadelphia Eagles, the LA Rams. They all kind of embrace this, be more aggressive on fourth down. They're going to trust the analytics. They're going to trust the math. They're going to cultivate offensive performances that reflect that. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff. It was really funny too, I think, also when I was watching Joe Witt Jr.'s defense, the first probably 50 plays, I was like, man, there's a lot of similarities here just in terms of philosophy, like just in terms of what they want to be in terms of first and second down, just basic structure, the coverages they want to get to, the amount of man they want to play, right? So there's a lot of like crossover. Offensively, I think there's a lot of difference when you look at personnel, formation, how they get to certain stuff. But in terms of like the DNA and the identity of it, it's actually more similar philosophically than you'd probably think. So I do think there are a lot of similarities to these two teams. I think they're at different kind of, periods of the gestation of the franchise, in terms of growing and developing. But I think, again, it is a fun matchup. The more you dig into it, the more you see the similarities.
You mentioned the fourth down thing, and I was just scrolling through some of these next-gen insights before the show, and this one is just absolutely mind-blowing. The Lions at plus 119.9% and the Commanders at plus 103.5% were the only two teams in the NFL to gain over a full game's worth of win probability added as a result of going for it on fourth down this season. Overall, the Commanders converted on 20 of 23 fourth downs this season, the highest conversion rate with any offense with at least 15 fourth down attempts since at least 1991. The Lions converted 2/3 of their fourth down attempts this season at 22 of 33. And I think a lot of people look at the fourth down stuff and they talk about, oh, this is a mentality. They're tough. They're aggressive. They're going to go for it. And there definitely is an element of that. And it's why I was really happy that as the season went on, Dan Quinn kind of leaned into that even more. He's like, I have Jaden Daniels, an ultimate fourth down weapon. We're the best fourth down team in over 25 years of the NFL. Like, we're going to go for it more often. But it's also leaning into the strategy and the analytics of it. And I think Campbell probably does go for it at times when the analytics would even say kick. But overall, like, these two guys that are like old school in so many ways embrace this new school way of thinking because they understand that it actually helps you win football games. And I think the second part of that is they understand who they are. They kind of understand their own analytics. And, Campbell had this kind of now famous fourth down a couple weeks ago. I think it was against Green Bay where they're tied with like 40 seconds to go. And even the aggressive analytics models were like, kick it. You go up 3 with 40 seconds to go and trust your defense. And he's like, nah, my defense is mega banged up. Like we're an offensive football team. We're going to go win the game with our offense. They get the fourth down. They run down more clock. They kick the game-winning field goal as time expires, win the football game. And I think Quinn has done that as well. So I think there's not just a strong sense of identity in terms of they set out to be fast, physical, all those things, but they have a sense of who they are and then what that means for how they deploy their talent, the game strategy and game management decisions they make. And I think a lot of that stuff could very well come into play in this game.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think understanding who you are and understanding who your playmakers are is a big piece of that, right? And so I think it's interesting when they do go for it on fourth down. A lot of teams kind of get back in the gun or whatever. Fourth and 3, they'll get back in the gun and they'll kind of, like let the quarterback deal it out. But Detroit will run the ball. Like they'll get in heavy personnel, almost like goal line personnel, and run power. And like picking up 3 on power, that is an identity of that team, right? Those guys buy into it. It's a cultural thing, right? And then I think here you say, hey, what do we do on fourth down? We kind of say Jaden Daniels with the quarterback run, with some of these quick passes. Like we kind of speak to what they do, but I do think it also is kind of a magnifying glass on who they think they are and who we think we are right now. And again, that's going to change a lot over the next couple of years for the Commanders. But I do think it's telling that when it's fourth and 3, it's like, let's call power. It's like, who in their right mind would do that? Nobody does that. But again, they've built that physical toughness, that idea that we can run on anybody. Like that's part of the DNA. And I think it shows up in those critical moments for sure.
They had over 1,800 yards on design runs from scrimmage this year, which is over 400 yards more than any other team. Which is
under center, you said too, right? I like that was the other thing.
Double check that one. I think it's just let's see. Oh yeah, from under center runs this season. So 1,801 yards, over 400 more than the next closest offense.
And it's crazy watching that because it reminds me so much of like what Kyle Shanahan's offense used to be like in 2000, like when he was in Atlanta, like under center, heavy play action, like the first and second down offense of this team feels like a Kyle Shanahan offense, like that under center ability, and now everyone's in the gun, everyone's in the pistol, everyone's kind of got some different stuff going on, but this feels so traditional. This kind of feels like a classic like zig when everyone's zagging, right? Instead of going to spreading people out, we're going to kind of pack it in. Reminds me of kind of like Jim Harbaugh when he came to Stanford, or Jim Harbaugh when he went to Michigan. Like we're going to run the ball more out of these more traditional sets, and those traditional sets do present issues for defenses that people seem to forget about as we get farther away from that being kind of the staple of the NFL. But I do think I think that's really telling. I think that's one of the best stats that we've been able to find is that under center runs, and they're so efficient at them, and it's a really fun offense to watch because of that. It kind of combines this traditional element with the trick plays and all this kind of stuff. So it is a cool offense, but I think that's like the thing that makes them go. It's under center, runs, and then everything kind of builds off of that.
Right, and if you want to maximize Jared Goff and under center off of play action, dude can touch every area of the field. Like if you want to run a hard, heavy play action to the right and then throw to a guy back deep left on a tight end leak or something on a post to the left, like you can do that because Jared Goff's arm is ridiculous. He's got a cannon and he's got a quick release, and he has no fear. And part of that no fear is how Dan Campbell has treated him. And there's a great piece in The Athletic this week on Campbell. Highly recommend that. There's a really fun piece actually on ESPN.com on Dan Skipper, their 6'9", sixth offensive lineman who's become a little bit of a cult hero in Detroit that I read this morning as well. So. Detroit is an easy team to root for. I think if it's not this week, they're a lot of fun. The way they built it, they have some great personalities. And obviously the shared misery of being really bad for a long time. I think a lot of people are happy for what Dan Campbell has done with the Lions. But for Washington this week, it's all business, and to see if they can take it down. Any other big picture things we want to hit on before we dive into the details here?
No, I think that's kind of the high-level stuff. And again, I think we can kind of start pointing out the differences between offenses and defenses and philosophies. But again, high-level, I'm really excited about the high-level comparisons because I do think Detroit is the model, right? Establish a strong culture, establish an identity on the offensive, defensive side of the football. San Francisco did it 3 years before them, and I just think that's the model. Good identity, good pieces, built through the draft, accent with free agency. And so I'm excited, again, to see if Washington can get to this point that Detroit's at now.
Yeah, because, that's the thing. Detroit has absolutely crushed their drafts. And we'll talk about a bunch of these players as we go here by nature. But, if they can do what Brad Holmes has done, this Washington team, it's scary because Detroit's first year with Campbell and Holmes, they were 3-13. Washington's first year, they're 12-5 in the regular season and have notched a playoff win. So what can they grow into? Going to be a whole lot of fun to watch, but that's for later. Now, let's talk Saturday. It's the Hoffman Show, wrapping up here on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We are streaming live on YouTube at the Team 980 tomorrow. Big one. We got insiders from the Commanders. We got John Keim on that side of it. We got our guy Nick Baumgartner on the Lions side of it from The Athletic. Last time I talked to Nick was actually in Indianapolis at the NFL Combine. He also does a lot of draft work for The Athletic, and so he came on our show at Radio Row on the NFL at the NFL Combine, and I texted him earlier today, and I was like, "Hey, dude, remember me? You want to talk about the divisional playoff game that we're playing this weekend, that the two teams that we cover are playing? Who would have thought that would have been the case when I was talking to you about the number 2 overall pick in the draft back in Indianapolis?" He's like, "Yeah, I would love to, and I can't believe it either." So very excited to talk to Nick. We also have, who do we have tomorrow? Oh, Mike Jones, Nick's colleague at The Athletic, who I probably also saw last in Indianapolis. But yeah, excited to talk to Mike always about the games this weekend in general, as well as this one. But before we do all that, we got to wrap up this show before we can worry too much about tomorrow. And with that, it is time for Real Things Real People Said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not gonna be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Alrighty. This one courtesy of JP Finley, NBC4, and of course 106.7 The Fan, who's out there in Ashburn every day. And JP committed a cardinal sin. You never give up your microphone as a reporter, not to someone you're interviewing, certainly not to a large offensive lineman like Sam Cosmi, so that he can play reporter and ask questions to his rookie teammate, Luke McCaffrey.
Will your brother be at the game? I don't know. Who does your mom love more, you or your brother? Which one? I got 3 brothers. Got to do your research. She has a new ranking. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. She has a new ranking every day. Yeah. I like the competition. It makes you more competitive and stuff like that. That's pretty cool to hear. Yeah. So where are you at right now? Since you're in the playoffs, you have to be number 1.
It's usually whoever talked to her last. I haven't texted her in about a day or two, so I think.
So you're probably bottom of the barrel right now.
But after this game, I'll start responding.
Okay. That's good to hear. Good luck this weekend.
You too.
I was doing an interview, and then you just jumped right in.
I think that was an important conversation. I think the fans really like that, just to know that information. So I learned something today.
Did you?
Yeah.
There's more than one brother?
There's more than
one. That's a good line from Chick Hernandez, that we learned today that Christian McCaffrey has, that Luke McCaffrey has more than one brother. Of course, the MVP caliber running back at the San Francisco 49ers. That's a funny bit. That's a good job. That's a good job by Sam Cosmi, though. It's also a good job by Luke McCaffrey. There's funny stuff all over there. One, Sam Cosmi being like, "Bleep your interview, chick. I don't care. I'm getting in here. I don't really. Whatever you're doing, it's your job. We're in the playoffs. Deal with me." Plus, who's gonna say anything to Sam Cosmi? He's Sam Cosmi. He's a large man who, when he wants to, can be very, very mean. Also can be very, very kind. Very, very kind, very, very nice, but can also be very, very mean. And then Luke hitting him with the, "Hey, bro, if you're going to be a reporter, you got to do your research." I feel like that's some respect from Luke McCaffrey towards all us jokers who stick microphone in their faces all the time. They know we do our homework. At least we try to. If you want to see our work, if you will, we will have much more previewing the game tomorrow. We'll do a pick 6. We'll talk about all the keys to the game. We'll take some of your calls as well. But I also will say the Take Command preview that Logan and I did today was good. It was deep. There was a point where I just kind of zoned out because Logan was just preaching, and I was like, this dude's on one right now. Like, this is amazing. So definitely want to check that out in the Take Command feed either tomorrow or you got all day on Saturday as we all wait until Saturday night. One more show to go for us. I'll see you at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Maryland basketball next here on the Team 980.